Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends. The new patch brings new characters, and this video will be a showcase for Tarvakh, the World Eater's Master of Executions, to complete the faction. A Master of Executions is a Chaos Space Marine who has dedicated his life to the service of Khorne and his existence to the art of the kill. Snowprint have translated that epitome of killing to their game. Tarvakh is a rare unlock through the 2-week hero release event. As usual, Snowprint have done really well with the animation and model. Tarvakh holds this giant axe in one hand and the heads of his fallen enemies in the other. He has 2 traits, the World Eater's Blessings of Khorne faction trait and the Rapid Assault trait. The stats on screen are at Diamond 3. I'll take a closer look later on to show you how this compares to other characters in the game. Tarvakh has a base movement speed of 3, which increases to 4 with Rapid Assault. He has a melee piercing attack with 1 hit. I'll quickly point out that Tarvakh has 2 weapons and a crit booster, which reflects his offensive output. At legendary level, that gives Tarvakh a pretty impressive 62% crit chance, so he'll crit almost 2/3 of the time before we get into his abilities. Tarvakh's active ability is called Murderous Swing. This does piercing damage to all adjacent enemies, but does bonus damage if there is only 1 enemy. Fairly straightforward. His passive is Trophy Taker. When Tarvakh attacks an enemy below 50% health, he gets bonus attack damage and crit damage. He also gains critical hit chance when he defeats enemies in battle, and with a base crit chance of above 60%, all it takes is 3 kills to have Tarvakh critting every turn. The abilities are pretty easy to understand, but let's look at the gameplay clips before we delve into the math and analysis. Harkin is the enemy here, as his stats are roughly average health and armor for playable characters at the moment. Tarvakh does an attack on equal elevation, with Rapid Assault but no crit, and you can see it does a decent chunk but doesn't one-shot our enemy. In this next clip, with a host of enemies around Tarvakh, his active does area of effect damage to all of them. The passive simply reflects a damage boost to his attacks when the target is at less than 50% health. It's a little bit hard to show at equal rarity, but it also gives him a bonus crit chance. You can see how the critical chance goes up to above 100% after he kills a few enemies. I went into this a bit more in the Jude video, but units with 2 weapons have their critical hits calculated in a slightly different way. At Legendary, with 2 guns, Tarvakh has an impressive 62% crit chance. Depending on how you use Tarvakh, there may be scope for giving him a knife rather than a gun. Knives have a lower base crit chance but have higher crit damage. Since Tarvakh's passive can take his crit chance to 100%, the extra damage may be valuable depending on the enemy and battlefield. On screen here, we run the numbers for his active against an average D3 character. On its own, it doesn't seem that impressive, not really doing significant amounts of damage when scaled against units of equal rarity. However, there are lots of little ways that the active adds damage. Remember that Tarvakh has a 25% damage boost courtesy of Rapid Assault. He also crits 2/3 of the time, and when we add that in, things start to look a lot more impressive. Towen, Tacticus ambassador and friend, has very kindly made some graphs here to help illustrate how the numbers stack up when all things are equal. Blue is baseline health, green is the unbuffed active, yellow with Rapid Assault, red with crit, and purple with both. As the graphs demonstrate, when Tarvakh gets crit and Rapid Assault, his active suddenly becomes a lot more impressive, and that's even before we start to think about things like High Ground and his World Eater's faction trait. For example, if we added High Ground here, that would let Tarvakh one-shot everything up to Incisors. All of a sudden, the Executioner moniker seems much more fitting for the character, and then we look at the graph and remember that this is potentially an area of effect attack. There will be some of you out there theorizing about a potential team where you add a lot of hits to a character for some sort of bonus hits team. The characters that already theoretically make up the mainstay of that team are Gulgorts, Snotflogga, Thoriad, and Vitruvius. The question is whether or not Tarvakh would fit into that team. I guess theoretically you could swap Tarvakh in here over someone like Eldryon, but I don't think it quite works out, and let me explain why. A maxed out Tarvakh does 4.6k damage. Let's assume the target is below 50% health and then add the bonuses from his passive, another 2.4k. Then let's give him a crit with maxed out items, and then that's again another roughly 2.4k. We're up to just under 10k per hit. For the sake of scaling, we'll use average L5 boss armor, roughly 1500 armor post side bosses. Damvar works out at roughly 7.8k. We multiply that with high ground, and again for the sake of argument we can also give him max stacks for Blessings of Khorne. Remember that Thoriad and Vitruvius's bonus hits are capped, so the extra hits from those will take him to about 30k. It's not awful, but we've used max settings for Tarvakh, assumed he crits and has high ground every turn, and it still doesn't really compare to the other characters in raid teams. The bar is just so high to be raid viable at the moment. The diehards might find a way to make him passable, but I'm skeptical about his role within a raid meta team. But there's still hope. We've already demonstrated that Tarvakh's active does a pretty good amount of damage with crits and rapid assault. What about if we can give that attack an extra hit through Thoriad's passive? It might not be the best against raid bosses, but against normal characters, you suddenly have an area of effect attack that can possibly one-hit KO multiple enemies. One of the common questions I get asked is how does the enemy AI control him on defense? I have running on screen a couple of AI versus AI battles. Tarvakh is on both teams and as you can see here, uses his active fairly liberally. Having talked through his kit and showcased his abilities, here is a summary slide that shows the abilities and stats of Tarvakh at various cutoffs. Feel free to pause or screenshot if you'd like. The character is summarized on screen in my usual infographic style. His numbers on the right are at Diamond 3. Towen, Tacticus Ambassador and Friend, has run those comparatively against the existing characters, and it shows that Tarvakh is reasonably tanky. His damage output against high armor targets is among the best in the game. That leads us to consider where the character might shine. Let's start with Horde modes. Tarvakh is reasonably tanky, does good damage, and has an area of effect skill that can kill multiple enemies at once. In survival mode, he would allow you to potentially clear multiple enemies with the ability reset, but I'm not sure you'd give this to him over other Chaos characters like Corodius or Abraxas. I've accordingly given him a 2 here. What about War? I think this will be Tarvakh's best mode as he seems to be great at killing other characters. He doesn't need to be in a World Eater's team and will function well in really any team comp. You've seen the carnage he can cause with Thoriad, and if you put those two together, I'd give Tarvakh a solid 4.5 here. Even if you don't add Thoriad, Tarvakh is still pretty great at killing enemies. Finally, guild raids. We spoke about potentially putting him into a bonus hits team, but I'm skeptical. For now, I've given him a 2. There you go, another character showcase. Thanks as always to my Patreons for their support, and bye for now.